Welcome to the Jody Mayberry Show. Last episode, Cassie Tucker was our guest. And although I'm not so sure she counts as a guest because she's on the team and she's around all the time, we're still going to do what we do when we have a guest. And that is to have Cassie return and ask me 3 questions. As usual, as we do with every guest, these questions are not scripted by me. They're not prompted by me. They're not encouraged by me. It's whatever comes to mind for Cassie. So welcome back, Cassie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
Well, it's good to have you here. And now is your time to turn it around and you get to ask me 3 questions about anything, whatever's on your mind.
Awesome. So I've asked you this question before, but I feel like it was very helpful and would be helpful for everyone else to hear your answer to this. But you go to a lot of the different national parks in the US all the time, but which one is your ultimate favorite and why?
I have actually had that question. Someone has asked that before, and
Really?
Which I like that question though, because I like talking about parks. And it depends on what you want to do. My 2 top parks are Yellowstone, which is almost everybody's, and Glacier National Park. So it depends on why you're going. Yellowstone has the highest concentration of wildlife in North America. So as far as wildlife viewing, there nowhere else will you see what you can see in Yellowstone National Park. They also have all the geological features, the geothermal features that are in high concentration you can't see elsewhere. So that's one reason to go to Yellowstone. Now, Glacier, it is spectacular. There may not be a more scenic place in North America. It is just amazing. So it's a great place to go for hiking. Not that Yellowstone isn't, but the scenery at Glacier National Park is just incredible. You'll see a lot less wildlife because it's so rugged. So you're more likely to see mountain goats, bighorn sheep, grizzly bears, that sort. I've seen a lot of mule deer there as well. So just things that like the rugged mountains a little better, you'll see there. So it's the park to go if you want a wilderness adventure. Now, if you ask directly which one's your favorite, the answer is always whichever between those 2 that I went to last. And at this point, that is Glacier National Park.
Yes, awesome. I need to get out there. So I will be leaning on your expertise before I head out there for a trip. But next question. So outside of the podcast that you have personally and your clients have, what is your favorite podcast to listen to?
Oh, there are some absolutely delightful podcasts. I'm going to cheat and not give a direct answer. The first podcast I ever discovered was the Jefferson Hour, and I still listen to that. I found that show in 2006, and I still listen to it. And it is an hour-long show. Clay Jenkinson portrays Thomas Jefferson for 30 minutes, and then whatever subject they talked about, then Clay as himself, they talk about Thomas Jefferson and that subject for the next 30 minutes. So that show is a delight. Hardcore History by Dan Carlin is a great one. And I really enjoy Mike Rowe's podcast, The Way I Heard It. That's a good one too. And then there's so many. I purposely didn't pick any shows that are done by people I know personally. So that if you hear this and say, when you heard me say that and you thought, why didn't Jody pick my show? Well, that's why, because I know you.
Yep. We need an unbiased opinion. That's awesome. I'll have to check those out. I find myself leaning towards very businessy podcasts all the time, but I need to expand my horizons and get more into the history stuff and the other topics to expand my knowledge. But
yeah, there are some wonderful ones out there. And Hardcore History, it's like an audiobook every episode. They're 3, 4, 5 hours long. So really unique what he's doing with podcasts. There's no one else that I'm aware of. It's probably done. There's no one else I'm aware of that is bold enough to do 5-hour episodes. And I still listen to them. You'll hear people say your podcast should be no longer than 22 minutes. Not necessarily true, because I've listened to every bit of his 5-hour episodes.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure if it's a very compelling topic and it's a good storytelling feature to the podcast, people will listen. So I don't know if that would come into play as much. But that kind of goes into my last question I have for you. So what is one, and you can state more than one if you'd like, but what is one of the biggest mistakes you see made in podcasting, and what can people do to not make that mistake?
One of the biggest mistakes people do is they give up too soon. It takes a year, usually. I tell people don't do it if you're not going to do it for a year. There is an exception to that, but usually I say don't do it if you're not going to do it for a year. So giving up is the biggest mistake because there's a lot of good to come from it if you stick with it. So that's one. Another is I actually almost made that mistake right here on this episode is people don't talk to the listener as if the listener is there. And you really should. When I listen to a podcast, I'm mowing the yard. Actually, I don't mow the yard often anymore. I'm going for a walk. I'm doing, I don't know, cutting wood. I'm out doing something and it's just me. And the host sometimes will say, if you're listening, if you're out there, to the listener, well, you wouldn't do that if someone's sitting at the table. If it's just me and you, Cassie, I just talk directly to you. I don't say those other things. So I think that's one is to connect better with the listener, act like the listener's there with you when you are hosting a podcast. And I do it as a guest too. When I'm a guest on someone else's show, I quite often will talk directly to the listener.
Yeah, so that's good.
Yeah. Those are my two.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a good thing to think about because I find myself doing that too. I'll talk to the other person on the podcast, but I'm not directly addressing, the audience. And same, a little tidbit too, same goes for social media, talking directly to the audience, meeting their needs and, the things that they're looking for in a product or a business. It's very important. So it's a good point.
Well, it's sometimes awkward when there's someone that's not there with you, but you have to talk like they are. It takes practice and it takes the decision to do it, even though it's a little awkward. Because if you'll hear this transition a lot, Cassie and I will be talking, then the host will say, and to you, the listener, well, you wouldn't do that if someone's at the table with you. I wouldn't say, and to you, Cassie, when we're right at a table together, you wouldn't do it. So you just talk to the listener as if the listener's sitting there at the table with you. So it doesn't ruin episodes, certainly doesn't, but it helps the listener experience to feel like they're part of it. I'll throw in a third mistake is podcasters that make reference to not many people listening to their show. Even if it's true, don't do it because how does that make a listener feel? If you say, oh, no one listens to my show, or even if it's a joke, don't do it. It makes people that listen to your show feel like, oh, well, he only wants a large audience. He doesn't care about me, individual listeners.
Right. It may even make them think like, oh man, why am I listening then? If no one else cares about this. So yeah, it's probably not wise. That's a good point.
That's right. All right, Cassie, because it's you, I'm going to throw the same questions back at you. What's your favorite national park?
Okay. Oh gosh. I personally, it's really sad to say, but I have not been to many of them. I grew up on the East Coast and this is where I've spent a lot of vacations growing up. And for some reason, my parents loved the beaches. So that's where we would always go. I'm trying to think where I've even been, honestly. I don't know, but the one that I would love to go to is Yellowstone. I watched the show Yellowstone and it really draws me in to want to go there and what you've said about Yellowstone. So if I were to pick the favorite park I would want to go to, I'd choose that one.
I one time spent a week in the backcountry of Yellowstone in the winter. It was brutal. My thermometer broke at 20 below.
Eesh.
So I don't know how cold it got, but it's wonderful. Okay, what is your favorite podcast? You can't say any of the shows I host.
Okay. Favorite podcast is definitely, I love Building a Story brand. Well, now Business Made Simple. They changed the name recently. So Donald Miller's team created this podcast. And then besides that, I'm trying to think of a non-businessy fun one. How I Built This is good too. It's a little bit more businessy. Like I said, I stick to very business forward podcasts. I need to expand my horizons, but I will definitely be looking into the ones that you talked about.
As a podcast listener, what are mistakes you hear podcasters make?
I would say one of the biggest things that I don't like is it not being conversational enough. So when it sounds too stale and kind of almost too scripted. You know, someone writes out every aspect of their podcast. I don't necessarily like that because I don't feel like it's very engaging sounding. It's not flowing very well. I really like hearing candid conversations that people have, especially when there's a guest involved. And then, you know, definitely the quality of the podcast can get in the way sometimes of being able to hear someone. So definitely, you know, getting the right technology to help you out, have the best podcast. And then, like you said, just going on pages and finding that, you know, this company used to post really valuable content, but they don't anymore. They kind of just let their podcast drop off. So that's a little discouraging because I find myself wanting more from them. So that's a few, but those are some of the biggest things I've seen in the past.
Well, there you go. You've got mistakes podcasters make from a podcaster's point of view and a listener's point of view. So I think that is a good summary. Cassie, it's great to have you back. Thank you for asking 3 questions. I put her on the spot. She didn't know she was going to have to do this until she had to do it. And she had to jump right in. So thank you so much, Cassie. And again, I mentioned it last episode. Where can we find you on Instagram?
Yes. Instagram, it's at Cassie, Cassie, Joy Tucker, Tucker.
Yeah, there you go. Go find her. And if I had wonderful hair like Cassie, I would have a really fun Instagram too. So it's man. I've noticed you use that as a feature sometimes.
It does come up at times, occasionally.
You probably do you get comments and questions about hair?
I do. I got a DM the other day, and honestly, my response is not very exciting. I don't do anything crazy to my hair. I think, honestly, I was just blessed with having, you know, good DNA, but that's pretty much all I can say to it besides $7 shampoo and conditioner that I buy. So nothing crazy to it.
Well, there you have it. There's the secret. There is no secret.
Yep, exactly.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to the Jody Mayberry Show.
Tell your story, Walk and Sugar J.